Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into something really interesting, a company analysis of BYD.
BYD?
Yeah, that's BYD, a Chinese company that's been making waves in the electric vehicle and battery market.
I've heard of them, yeah. They're doing some pretty cool things.
So they're producing cars, buses, trucks, and get this, they even make the batteries that power them.
Wow, so they're not just involved in the electric vehicles themselves, but also the power sources.
Exactly. And to make it even more interesting, they also produce solar panels.
Oh, wow. So they've got like a full clean energy ecosystem going on.
Yeah, it's a pretty unique approach. And to add another layer to this deep dive, we're going to be looking at BYD through the lens of Warren Buffett's investing principles.
Interesting. Would Buffett buy this stock?
It's a great question, and I think it will be a really insightful way to analyze the company.
Exactly. We'll break down BYD's business, their management, and their financials to see if they would meet Buffett's criteria.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Where should we start? Well, let's jump right into their business. BYD's mission is to bring innovative and sustainable solutions to the automotive and energy sectors. But what really sets them apart, with so many players in these markets?
Well, one thing that stands out is their vertical integration.
Vertical integration.
Yeah, it means they control almost every step of the process from sourcing raw materials to manufacturing the final product.
Ah, see, so they're not just assembling cars, they're making pretty much everything in-house.
Exactly, and that gives them a significant cost advantage, which is super important in such a competitive market.
That makes sense. Speaking of manufacturing, I was reading that their largest plant in Xi'an can produce over 1 million vehicles every year.
Wow, that's incredible. It's mind-boggling to think about that kind of scale.
It really is. I mean, that kind of output helps them keep prices competitive, which is crucial in the rapidly growing EV market.
Absolutely. And it also positions them well for future growth.
Definitely. And then there's the Blade battery, BYD's innovative battery technology.
Ah, yes, the
Yeah.
Blade battery. It's getting a lot of attention.
And for good reason. It's safer, more efficient, and cheaper than traditional lithium-ion batteries.
The cell-to-pack design is really interesting.
Delta pack.
Yeah, it integrates the battery pack directly into the vehicle's structure, making it more space efficient.
So it's not just a separate component that's slotted in.
Right, and that has implications for safety, lifespan, potentially even cost.
Wow. And they've really gone all in on electric vehicles, right?
Yeah,
Didn't they stop producing gasoline cars a while back?
they did. Back in 2022, BYD completely ended production of purely gasoline-powered cars.
That's a bold move, a sign of their commitment to the future of electric mobility.
And it's a smart move from a business perspective. The global EV market is projected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 32.5% through 2030.
Wow. 32.5%. That's huge.
It is. It represents a massive opportunity for companies like BYD.
But of course, it's not all smooth sailing, right? I mean, the EV market is super competitive.
Oh, absolutely. You've got major players like Tesla, established car makers. Everyone's vying for a piece of the pie.
Right? And breaking into markets with high tariffs like the US and the EU is a big challenge for BYD.
It is. Tariffs create barriers to entry and can make it difficult to compete on price.
Plus, the whole regulatory landscape for EVs is constantly changing.
Yeah, it's a moving target, which adds another layer of complexity.
Speaking of challenges, I was surprised to learn that BYD actually outsold Ford in Brazil in 2024.
Oh, yeah, that was a big win for them. Shows that they're finding ways to overcome those obstacles.
It does. So they're strategically targeting emerging markets like Southeast Asia and Latin America, where they face fewer tariff barriers.
Exactly. It's a smart strategy to gain a foothold and build brand recognition in regions with high growth potential.
Okay, so we've talked about their business, their impressive scale, their all-in bet on EVs, and some of the challenges they face. Now let's shift gears and talk about BYD's management.
Sounds good. The founder and chairman, Wang Chuanfu, is a key figure in the BYD story. He's often described as a visionary leader.
A visionary.
Yeah, he's been instrumental in driving BYD's growth and navigating the complexities of the EV market with a long-term perspective.
I see. But I've also read about some controversies surrounding BYD's management, particularly allegations of poor working conditions at their factory in Brazil.
Right. There have been some concerns raised about that.
What has BYD done to address those concerns?
Well, they've publicly stated that they've terminated contracts with subcontractors who were found to be violating labor standards.
So they're taking steps to ensure ethical practices in their supply chain.
Yes. And they've also emphasized their commitment to improving working conditions across all their operations.
Okay, and there have also been some questions about transparency regarding their EVs range and battery degradation.
Yeah, some customers have expressed concerns about those issues.
And how has BYD responded to those concerns?
They've acknowledged the feedback and have stated that they're working to improve transparency by providing more detailed information about range and battery performance.
So they're taking steps to address the skepticism.
It seems so. They're engaging with customers and trying to build trust.
It'll be interesting to see how those efforts are perceived and whether they can fully alleviate those concerns.
Definitely time will tell.
All right, so we've talked about BYD's business, their management. Now let's move on to the numbers and look at their financial health.
All right, let's dive into the financials.
Starting with revenue growth, BYD reported an impressive 42.04% year-over-year increase in revenue in 2023.
That's phenomenal. It really highlights their success in expanding their market presence.
And it's not just revenue growth.
Yeah.
BYD also has positive free cash flow.
Positive free cash flow is always a good sign. It means they have cash available for investments in new technologies, research and development, and even potential returns to shareholders.
Right, so it gives them a lot of flexibility.
Exactly. It puts them in a strong position for future growth.
And another positive indicator is their relatively low debt-to-equity ratio.
Debt-to-equity ratio.
Yeah, it basically shows how much debt a company has compared to the amount of money invested by owners.
Ah, I see. So a low debt-to-equity ratio indicates that they're not overly reliant on borrowed money.
Exactly. It's a sign of financial stability and prudence.
So overall, BYD's financial health looks pretty solid.
It does. They've got strong revenue growth, positive free cash flow, and a healthy balance sheet. It paints a pretty optimistic picture so far.
It does, but we still need to consider other factors like market sentiment, ownership structure, and a thorough risk assessment.
Right. So far, we've covered their business model, their management, and their financial health.
Right, we've gotten a pretty good overview.
We have. But now it's time to shift our focus to something a bit different, market sentiment. How are investors feeling about BYD?
Well, their stock has been a bit volatile, hasn't it? It's been on a bit of a roller coaster ride.
It has. Why is that? What's driving that volatility?
A few things, really. You've got investor sentiment towards Chinese equities in general, which can be influenced by things like trade relations and political developments.
Right, so any kind of tension or uncertainty between China and the West can impact how investors view Chinese companies.
Exactly. And then there's the looming possibility of trade wars, which always creates uncertainty in the market.
Trade wars, yeah, that would definitely have an impact. Are there any specific events that have noticeably affected BYD's stock price?
Yeah, there have been a few times when we've seen a dip in the stock. For example, whenever there's talk of new tariffs being imposed on Chinese goods, or when there's increased tension between China and the U.S., we often see a negative reaction in the market.
That makes sense. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? BYD's stock has also been recovering, hasn't it?
It has. It's been bouncing back from those lows.
So what's driving that recovery? What are investors seeing that's making them more optimistic about BYD?
I think there are a few factors at play. One is their continued expansion into new markets. They're not just focused on China anymore. They're making inroads in Europe, Southeast Asia, Latin America.
So they're diversifying their reach.
Exactly. And that's appealing to investors. Also, their advancements with the Blade battery are generating a lot of buzz. The technology is seen as a game changer in terms of safety, efficiency, and cost.
It does seem like a pretty big deal. And of course, their strong financials are also contributing to the positive sentiment.
Definitely. Investors are looking at their consistent revenue growth, their positive free cash flow, their healthy balance sheet. Those are all signs of a company that's on the right track.
It sounds like investors are starting to recognize BYD's potential.
They are. A lot of analysts have given BYD a buy rating based on their strong growth potential and their leading position in the EV market.
That's a pretty strong endorsement.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about market sentiment. Now let's unravel something that I always find fascinating. Ownership structure. Who owns BYD?
Well, it's a bit more complex than your average company.
Oh, how so? What makes it so unique?
Well, for one thing, Berkshire Hathaway is a significant stakeholder in BYD.
Wow. Berkshire Hathaway. You mean Warren Buffett's investment firm?
The one and only. It's definitely a notable vote of confidence.
It is. I mean, some might even see it as a Buffett stamp of approval.
You could say that. And it's not just institutional investors. The founder, Wang Chuanfu, still holds a significant stake in the company.
He does. How much are we talking about?
He owns around 18% of BYD.
Wow. That's a sizable chunk. He's clearly still very invested in the company's future.
Absolutely. It shows a strong commitment and belief in BYD's vision.
So we've got major players like Berkshire Hathaway on board. We've got the founder still heavily invested. That's all very positive. But what about the risks? Every investment carries some level of risk. So what are some of the risks associated with investing in BYD?
That's a great question, and that's where a SWOT analysis comes in. It's a helpful framework for assessing a company's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
SWOT analysis. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I like it. It gives us a nice, well-rounded view. So can you walk us through BYD's SWOT analysis?
Absolutely. Let's start with their strength. One of their biggest strengths is their brand recognition in China. They're a household name there and have a very loyal customer base.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
They've been operating in China for a long time, right?
They have. They were founded back in 1995, so they've had plenty of time to build a strong brand presence. Another strength is their vertical integration, which we talked about earlier. It gives them a significant cost advantage over their competitors.
Right, because they control so much of the supply chain.
Exactly. And they also have strong support from the Chinese government, which has been very supportive of the electric vehicle industry.
That's definitely a big plus. So those are some of their strengths. What about weaknesses? What are some areas where BYD could improve?
Well, one weakness is their limited brand recognition outside of China. They're still relatively unknown in many parts of the world.
So they need to work on building their global brand awareness.
They do. If they want to become a truly global player, they need to increase their visibility in key markets like Europe and North America.
Makes sense. Are there any other weaknesses we should be aware of?
There's also the potential over-reliance on government subsidies. The Chinese government has been very generous with subsidies for electric vehicle companies, but those subsidies could be reduced or phased out in the future.
So that's something to keep an eye on. It could impact their profitability down the line.
It could. And there have also been some concerns about product perception and quality in certain Western markets.
What do you mean?
Well, some consumers in Europe and North America have expressed concerns about the quality and reliability of Chinese-made cars.
So they need to overcome that perception if they want to gain a foothold in those markets.
Exactly. They need to convince consumers that their cars are just as good as, if not better, than those made by established automakers.
It sounds like they've got some work to do to solidify their global image. Okay, so we've covered strengths and weaknesses. Now let's move on to opportunities. What are some of the opportunities that BYD can capitalize on?
Well, the biggest opportunity is the booming global demand for electric vehicles. The market is growing rapidly, and BYD is well-positioned to take advantage of that growth.
They've certainly got the production capacity to meet that demand.
They do, and they're also investing heavily in research and development to stay ahead of the curve.
What kind of technologies are they working on?
They're exploring things like solid-state batteries, which are seen as the next generation of battery technology. They're also looking at autonomous driving technologies and other innovations that could give them a competitive edge.
So they're not just resting on their laurels. They're actively looking for ways to innovate and stay ahead of the competition.
Exactly. And that's a good sign for investors. And speaking of opportunities, BYD can also expand into new markets. They're already making progress in some regions, but there's still a lot of untapped potential out there.
So they could become a truly global force in the EV market.
They could, and
Yeah.
that's a very exciting prospect.
Okay, so we've talked about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities. Now let's wrap up the SWOT analysis with threats. What are some of the threats that BYD faces?
Right. Every company faces threats. So what are some of the challenges that BYD needs to overcome?
Well, the biggest threat is the intense competition in the EV space. They're not just competing with Tesla anymore. They're also facing competition from all the traditional automakers who are now ramping up their EV production.
It's a crowded market, that's for sure. So they need to differentiate themselves from the pack.
They do. They need to offer something unique, whether it's their technology, their pricing, their design, something that sets them apart from the competition.
Right. And I imagine trade conflicts and regulations pose a significant threat as well.
Absolutely. Especially trade tensions between China and the West. Those can create a lot of uncertainty and disruption for a company like BYD.
Yeah, tariffs, import restrictions, all of that can make it difficult to operate in certain markets. Exactly. And then there's always the risk of supply chain disruptions and fluctuating raw material costs.
Right. The global supply chain is still recovering from the pandemic, and there are always geopolitical factors that can cause disruptions.
Exactly. So BYD needs to have a robust supply chain strategy to mitigate those risks.
Okay, so navigating those geopolitical and economic uncertainties will be crucial for their long-term success.
It will. It's a complex landscape that requires strategic thinking, adaptability, and a bit of luck.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've analyzed BYD's business model. We delved into their management and financials. We assessed market sentiment. explored their ownership structure, and even conducted a thorough SWOT analysis.
We've really gotten a comprehensive view of the company.
We have. And the question that we posed at the beginning of this deep dive still remains, would Warren Buffett invest in BYD?
It's a tough call. They have many qualities that align with Buffett's investment philosophy.
Yes.
Well, they have a dominant position in a growing market, a clear competitive advantage, and a proven track record of innovation. But there are those geopolitical risks and ethical considerations that we talked about. Those might give even the most seasoned investor pause.
So it's not a simple yes or no answer.
Exactly. It's a complex equation with a lot of variables.
So we've given our listeners a deep dive into BYD. We've presented all the information. We've analyzed the company from every angle. Now it's up to them to weigh the potential rewards against the risks and decide for themselves whether BYD is a good investment.
Exactly. We've equipped them with the knowledge. Now it's time for them to do their own due diligence and make an informed decision.
That's right. We always encourage our listeners to do their own research and consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions.
Absolutely. Investing is a personal decision, and it's important to make choices that align with your individual financial goals and risk tolerance.